It's not every day that we get a game system that replicates the games of old and yet cleans it up so incredibly well that anybody in the tabletop RPG community can read. But I am here to tell you all that Old School Essentials provides just that. How's it going, everyone, and welcome to No Fun Allowed. And today I want to give an overview of Old School Essentials, a retro clone of the Advanced and Basic Dungeons & Dragons. In this video, I'm going to be covering 5 of the books that cover the Old School Essentials. We have the core rules, the classes and equipment, the advanced classes, the monsters, and the adventures and treasure books. Between these 5 books, they provide an incredible experience to play OSR style play. So I could just sit here all day long and praise Old School Essentials, but I actually want to show off what makes it so great. So let's start diving into that, shall we? The first thing I always love looking at whenever I cover a RPG is the classes, because those really infer to you what this game actually is. As a friendly reminder, this is an old school Renaissance game, so we are going to see the motifs of the OSR. We have rolling ability scores of 3d6. For those of you that are coming from the newer editions of the tabletop role-playing games, you're probably going to be thinking, 3d6, that's so weak. Well, it's actually perfectly fine here, as we'll be seeing. On the matrix here of what your stats actually do, you can see that the stats are perfectly fine. On a 3d6, on average, you're going to get anywhere between 9 to 12, meaning you get a plus nothing to your ability. So long as you don't roll too bad, you're not going to get a negative, but if you do roll high, then you get those sweet, sweet plus 1s, plus 2s, and if you are incredibly lucky, you get that sweet, sweet plus 3. In addition to that, we get the beautiful charisma adjustment table, which shows off how people react to you. And very, very importantly for old school play, we have the max number of retainers. This is not a game where 4 PCs can run out into the wilderness, into the dungeons, and do whatever the heck they want and get away with it. No, you need an army of people by your side. So having more and more retainers to help you out is going to increase everyone's survivability. When it comes to the core classes of this game system, we do get the classics. We get the cleric, the fighter, the thief, and the magic user. But in addition to that, in this book, we also get the elf, the dwarf, and the halfling. Once again, if you're new to the OSR style play, class and race are a combined thing. So giving a quick glance over at what makes classes in this game, looking at the cleric here, we can see that they have a d6 for hit dice. And yes, you are rolling for your hit dice at level 1. We see that they have a certain allotment of what armors they can use, what weapons they can use. They get a myriad of abilities. We can see that at 9th level, they gain the ability to create a stronghold, at which point people will flock to them. And very important, something we're going to see with all the classes here, is the class level progression chart. This is very important because this is going to tell you what your character can do at certain levels. And most important of all, it's going to show off how quickly you level up, because not everyone levels up at the same pace. The cleric here levels up with 1,500 XP, but then we can see here with the dwarf, because the dwarf has certain other abilities that make them stronger in certain regards, they actually take longer to level up, requiring 2,200 XP to level up that first time. But comparing the stats here, we can see that the saving throws for the dwarf are much better than the starting clerics. One of my favorite classes in the core book here, the elf, is basically a combination between a fighter and a magic user. And that is reflected in their XP chart. As we'll see here, they require 4,000 XP to level up. You heard it here right. At level 1 as an elf, you're going to see everyone else around you just zooming past, getting level ups left, right, and center. But here's the thing. When you level up, it is impactful. Because, of course, you start getting more spells, you're pretty proficient in your levels, and hopefully you're going to catch up to everyone else. The fighter, the most basic of all the classes here, they get absolutely no abilities at all whatsoever, except for 2 things. 1, they can use any armor and any weapon. 2, they can build a stronghold at any time once they get enough gold. And 3, their progression chart is actually not that terrible. My absolute most favorite class in here, the halfling, is a very unique one. The halfling is essentially like a thief, but has incredibly good saving throws. For those of you new to OSR play, you might be questioning, what are these saving throws? We have here death, wand, poison, breath, and staff, rod, spell. So in modern games, whenever you go to attack someone with an effect, they have to beat your DC. That is not the case in almost every single OSR system. More often than not, you have your own spell save DC. You have your own save DCs. So if someone were to subject you to, let's say, a spell effect, instead of everyone having to beat the same DC, the halfling here at level 1 has to roll a 12. But then we compare that to the fighter, and the fighter has to roll a 16. Here we have the magic user. Another big factor of the OSR is the hit dice change between classes, as the magic user and the thief share in a d4 for their HP. As a friendly reminder in this game, when you drop to 0 HP, you are outright dead. Another factor as to why you want to have a whole bunch of henchmen, hirelings, and retainers by your side. And of course, the magic user does require more XP to level up, so they are squishier for longer. Why is that? There is a game balance in factor here. The fact that the magic user is both squishy and takes longer to level up does suck. It means that they are going to be stuck at the lower levels for longer. But once they hit the higher levels, they are going to blow everyone else out of the water, literally. Spells are dangerous in this game. A single spell can easily kill a lot of people. They can put you out of commission. They can make it so that you are no longer contributing to the fight. They are scary. So the game balance there is the fact that the magic user, you're going to protect them for as long as possible, but once they finally get there, they'll be holding more than their own weight. And lastly, for the core classes here, we get the thief. Bunch of fun abilities, and we can see here that being a thief does pay off because you in fact get to level up quite frequently. They have the lowest XP range out of anybody. That does mean that you cap out earlier than most, but hey, once you start leveling up, your abilities get that much better. Once you level up, you can climb sheer surfaces with a near certain degree. You can eventually start moving in the shadows. You can eventually start picking locks better, etc., etc. For the remainder of the classes and equipment book, we get a nice detail on a whole bunch of things. First off being alignment. In this game there are 3, law, neutrality, and chaos, which are a big deal because they do infer what your character can use. They do in fact have bonuses and they have penalties. We get languages, of which if you are smart, i.e. you have high intelligence, you get more of. And then we show off, okay, of course there is going to be level differences because everyone levels up differently. Coinage, we get how the coinage works. Equipment, a very big factor of the old school style play, as equipment is going to infer what you can and cannot physically do. Whole bunch of great weapon stats here. You can run this super simple and say that every weapon just does a d6 of damage, but that's entirely up to your preference if you want to have varying damage or not. We also get incredible detail here on a whole bunch of land and water vehicles, of which we get an incredible amount of detail. Look at this. We see this little graph here. We can see that a canoe costs 50 gold. It's got a maximum cargo of 6,000, which is measured in coins, by the way. We can see that a canoe can be used in rivers and swamps. It's got a length of 15 feet. It's got beams of 3 feet. It's got draft. What is draft? It says it right there. More and more great detail on how vehicles work in this game. And that just is, I'm looking at this right now and I'm already thinking of fun water encounters I want to run. Also mercenaries, a very big factor. Of course, you have those very, very loyal retainers by your side, but sometimes you need to bring more oomph into the fight, and that is where the mercenaries come in. If you've got the spare cash and you know you're going to go up against a dragon, hey, let's go ahead and hire 30 archers and try and put that thing down. Morale. As a friendly reminder, most creatures do not fight to the death. If you get into a fight with 20 enemies and you kill 10 of them right from the get-go, the other 10 are probably going to run away. It just makes sense. So it goes into great detail on how to use morale. We get specialist for when you get to the higher tiers of play, when you're building your castles and fortresses and whatever else. And of course here we get a nice detailed list on how to make them. And that's the great part. Once your PCs hit that high level, you plop down a blank sheet of paper in front of your players and say, hey, draw me up your castle and we'll see how much it cost. Fun times all around. Now moving on to the core rules here, we get a great list of a whole bunch of things. This is mostly for the referees, the GMs, the DMs, whatever you want to call it. But there is some things that are pertinent to players. And the most important one right from the get-go is the old school style play, the sequence of play. How do dungeons work? It's not just willy-nilly, you go from room to room and there's a guaranteed encounter. There is that, but there is also wandering monsters, and wandering monsters is what's going to infer how long your players can stay in the dungeon, or how long they can stay in the wilderness. This is not a game where you can take a little nappy new and you're just fine. No, if you take damage, you're going to be out of commission for quite some time. More great details here about moving all throughout the wilderness and in dungeons, how to check for encounters. Surprise! Fun fact here, there could be two opposing forces that walk into each other and no one's surprised. There could be one group being surprised, and there actually could be both groups being surprised, in which case everyone goes, ah! And then eventually the combat starts as normal. Very fun times. But as a friendly reminder, not all monsters are natively hostile. You can have it where monsters have reactions, where right from the get-go, they look at the party and are unsure of what's going on. They could be indifferent. They could be helpful. Depending on the monster, depending on the situation, you roll on that 2d6 table there, and that will infer you what is going on. Because XP is such a great deal in Old School Essentials, we get a great list here on what actually is XP. You do not get a whole bunch of XP killing monsters. In fact, more often than not, you want to avoid monsters, as dealing with monsters is a deadly affair. More often than not, the majority of your XP is going to come from recovered treasure. You want to go into the dungeon not to kill monsters, but to get their hoard. Of course, sometimes you do have to kill the monster to get that gold, but hey, there is a chance that your thief can sneak in there and steal it. You can cause a distraction. You can pit other monsters against each other. You can do a number of things. You don't need to just outright kill the monsters. And here we get some other fine details about falling, foraging, hunting, but healing is the big deal. It's not a long rest system where you get all your resources back willy-nilly. No, for each full day of complete rest, a character can recover 1d3 hit points. So at the higher levels of play, once you do hit 20, 30, 40 HP, you go into the dungeon, you spend some time in there. Once you take a bunch of damage, then you decide to pull back. You stay in town for a few days and repeat process. Hirelings are not mercenaries or retainers. There are people that are going to be doing services for the party and not going to put themselves into outright dangerous situations. Light vision and visibility. The majority of classes cannot see in the darkness, so you're going to have to bust out the torches and the lights and everything else. Some people do have vision, but it is not dark vision, it is infravision. Infravision allows you to see heat signatures in the darkness, but it doesn't allow you to see any fine details. If you're in a cold, dark dungeon, then you can't see anything even if you've got the infravision, but if something pops up and it's in the dark, then you are able to see it no problem. The simple rules on handling movement. This just leads more and more into what I love about these books. The fact that these Old School Essentials clean up the rules so incredibly well. Instead of having to flip through a whole bunch of different tomes on how to figure out one specific thing, they are just listed incredibly well written, well detailed, well thought out, and easy to find. And here is another great aspect I love about Old School Essentials is these retainers. The people that you have by your side. These are the loyal ones. These are the ones that are going to be fighting next to you. These are the ones that you're going to want to train up. And another great aspect about retainers is if your PC dies, then you don't have to sit there and do nothing for the rest of the session. You just take over one of your retainers and you keep on playing. Going into more and more detail, and it's just providing everything you need as a referee to run combat, to run exploration, to even run roleplay. It just covers it all. We also get this nice list here about handling the attack chart and this matrix. This is using THAC0, this is using descending armor class, but as we'll be getting into, you can easily replace that with ascending armor class, as of course just rolling a dice and saying I have got a +2 or to it. That just makes your life easy, right? And lastly, for the core rules here, it gets into dealing with magical items and scrolls and rings and everything else. Moving on to the advanced rules here, this is where we get into some really fun stuff. This adds a ton, and I do mean a bunch, of classes. This also does add the ability for you to separate class and race, should you desire. If you want a more modern approach to things, you can easily separate the two. I'm just going to dive through some of the advanced classes here. One of my most favorite from the advanced here being the acrobat. A person who is a thief but can also use their acrobatic skills in combat by jumping away or jumping onto enemies. We get the Bard, who thankfully is not an OP class. The Bard here gets some fun abilities, they can recall lore, they eventually get some spell casting, but they are just all-rounders. They don't do anything too incredibly well, but they can do a bunch of things. We get gnomes, which have a pretty interesting career lineup here. They actually have the ability to use some weapons, and they can, in fact, have some magical abilities, but as we can see here on the progression chart, they are not gonna be capping too far as some other people. As a friendly reminder, all of the human classes, they can go up to level 14. But all of the non-human classes, they cap out at somewhere else. And the reason for that is because of that game balance. Some people are going to be better early on, and some people are going to be better later on. We get the half-orc, and the half-orc is not a brute necessarily. The half-orc is actually somewhat of a thief, but a little bit more of a front-lining thief. And what's also fun is they are so ugly that retainers have a -1 to the loyalty. And I mean, look at that. That's just a face only a mother could love. We get the knight, which is essentially a fighter, but has a more of a regal code to them. And one could call it a chivalric code, as it states right here. And they have a nice progression table as well, but they have to be upholden with whatever vow that they have. Same thing with paladins. Paladins are in the same regard. They have the fighting prowess of a fighter, but they also get some added abilities. They can use some divine magic, they can use some healing, they can turn undead, but they don't get these things immediately. And most important of all is look at that progression chart. They take longer to level up, and in addition to that, if they stray from their path, then they are going to immediately lose their paladin powers and get reverted to a fighter. Here we get detailed out how to use character races if you want to move things around, such as if you want the drow to be something else other than just the drow and the dwergar, and etc, etc. A nice detailed list here on poison because, as a friendly reminder, everything dies when it hits 0 HP, so poison doing more damage, or doing any amount of damage, is a pretty significant deal. And another great aspect here is the advanced rules. Here we get limits on turning the undead because, as listed, people can turn undead as much as they want. I certainly think that there should be a limit to it. We also get attacking with 2 weapons, charging into weapon, splash weapons, missile attacks into melee, magic, all of these things that are definitely must at my table. Another thing is, natively, most people don't multi-class. Most people just level up in the same class for their entire career, but we also get rules on how you can potentially multi-class. Secondary skills, what were you before you were who you are, right? I roll up a 47, what do I get? I was a fisher, huzzah! For those of you that are veterans of the OSR, you know what's coming with monsters. We get nice, small stat blocks that service us enough and do whatever it is that we need. But for those of you that are new to the OSR, this is going to be a great showcasing of what we are working with here. So as we'll be getting into, when it comes to looking at a stat block of a monster, we get a bunch of abbreviations. AC, HD, ATT, SV, THAC0, NA, this and that. So the reason for that is because why should we waste our space and time on something that we already know, right? We don't need a lot of details on how to run a monster. Per example being, look at the very first creature, an Acolyte. We see that they have an AC of 2, a hit die of 1, they attack once, they have a THAC0 of 19, they move 60, this and that. Instead of taking up a tremendous amount of space, instead of worrying about stats that don't matter, we just look at a small little bullet point list here of what they can do. And also what I love about this monsters book here is not only do we get a nice, huge variety of monsters, in addition to all of their stat blocks, we also get, for a lot of them, we get these special details listed down below. Such as, for example, looking at this Acolyte. We can see there that the traditional Acolyte has this much. They provide that, they do this. But in addition to that, they also have special abilities, such as, let's look at this leader. Groups of 4+ of Acolyte are led by a higher level cleric. On a 1d10, on a 1 through 4, they are 2nd level, on a 5 through 7, they're 3rd level, on an 8 through 9th, they're 4th level, and on a 10th, they're 5th level. If you're going up against a 5th level cleric and all of you are only level 1, and then you can probably kiss your characters goodbye. And just that, right? That's all the information we need. Another one being this Basilisk here. We get all the information we need right there in that stat block, but hey, we also get some fun things, such as the surprise. Character surprised by a Basilisk, meet its gaze. which means that they could theoretically get petrified. And then we have the petrifying touch. We have the averting eyes. If your players don't look at the basilisk, then they're going to have a bad time fighting this thing, right? Just quickly blazing through all of the monsters here, we can see here that this wastes no space. It wastes nobody's time. You can look up any monster and immediately know how they're going to be ran in combat just by looking at their stats and inferring of what's going on in the situation. A personal favorite of mine and an absolute hatred of almost every player out there, we have rust monsters. Rust monsters are scary creatures. They have actually a lot of hit points there, 22, that actually is quite a lot. But more importantly about the rust monsters is when they attack and when they get attacked, then all of the metal that touches them is going to disintegrate. And that includes magical items. Magic items have a 10% chance per plus to be unaffected on each successful hit. If you have a +1 weapon, then there is only a 10% chance that your weapon is actually going to come out of that thing intact, which is great. The fact that your players can go up and fight a whole bunch of minotaurs, they can go fight a dragon, but if a whole bunch of people turn the corner and see a single rust monster, you're going to see a whole bunch of people run away in cower and fear. That's just hilarious, right? And why are your players fighting all those monsters? Why, it's to get the treasure, and it's presumably part of an adventure. For the final book here, we get the adventures and treasures list. And mind you, there is a lot of great inspiration to be had here. Look here, adventure scenarios, just rolling up simple things to get your players going. Why are they going? Where are they going? Oh, they're going to scout an enemy outpost. Oh, or they're visiting a sacred site. Then we can make ourselves a little dungeon. What are the monsters in there? How are you going to map the dungeon? How are you going to stock the dungeon? Etc, etc. These simple lists here are going to help you flesh out any dungeon that you have. But dungeons aren't the only thing in the OSR play. While yes, you go out to adventure and kill monsters, get gold, you use that gold for a reason. You go back to the town. What's in the base town? What do we got going on here? What are the guards looking like? What rumors can we see to our players? What NPCs do they get to interact with? These things are important for having a truly awesome game. We also get this incredible list here on dungeon encounter tables that you can just have if you want, but I would strongly recommend that if you make your own dungeon that you create your own rollable list here. We also get the wilderness encounter tables, which is going to, of course, be a big deal because you can't just spend all your time in the dungeon and once you hit 1 HP, then you come back to town. You're probably going to want to be smarter than that. You know that there is dangerous things out there in the wilderness. You don't want to stay out there too long. And once your players start getting into the stronghold play, whether they are invading other people's strongholds or they're defending their own, whole bunch of stronghold encounters list here, NPC parties to interact with, and finally placing treasure. What treasure are we working with here? When it comes to every monster in the monster manual, it has a listing there on what type of treasure it may have, whether it be individual treasure or a treasure hoard. And here you can easily look it up and start rolling for it. And it's awesome to keep it random because instead of feeling like the world is more contrived, instead of it feeling like the players always are being treated fairly, it's awesome to make it feel like it is random because then everyone involved, including you, is going to reap the rewards of the random find. And of course, the big thing here for all players, what they want, what they're coveting, magical items. What are they going to find? Are they going to find magical armors that are good? Are they going to find a whole bunch of cursed items? The bag of holding, a huge one, because if they don't have a bag of holding, then they're not going to be able to pick up all the swag in the dungeons. Just an incredible list here of a whole bunch of different magical items for your players to use. Potions, rings, staffs, maps, scrolls, everything else. Just it all comes together. When all is said and done, Old School Essentials is an absolute complete package. Absolutely fantastic stuff. The rules are concise. It gives you the OSR style feel, but at the same time, it doesn't require you to know the vernacular. This spells it out right for you. If you are new to the OSR scene, I cannot recommend enough Old School Essentials. This is going to be the gateway drug for the OSR for years to come. I already know it. For those of you that are veterans of the OSR, then I also say this is a great system because it is a way to get new people in, and at the same time, if you want a rules light sense of OSR, then this is great. Of course, there is much crunchier systems, and I will be covering those later on, but this is clear, concise, to the point, and an absolute blast to read through and play. So what is Old School Essentials? Old School Essentials is an amazing product that I cannot recommend enough. I hope all of you that were on the fence about diving into the OSR, just at least try it out. And hey, there's going to be a link down below for a free version of this, because with the majority of OGL stuff, there is a free product out there. So try it out, look at it, see what you like about it. It's a very simple system. Instead of getting bogged down with all of the nonsense, it is a way to play the game and just have a blast with it. Not too much prep time required. So go ahead and tell me, are you planning on picking up Old School Essentials, or are you going to try it out a little bit to see what you're liking about it? Are you new to the OSR and haven't even experienced it? Or are you a veteran of the OSR and you know what you are coming to find? And do you prefer rules light systems, or do you prefer really crunchy systems? Go ahead and tell me. I will be covering other OSR style systems, and I want you guys to tell me what systems I should be covering next. Please do. Leave it all down below because I want to hear it. But that's going to do it for me. Thank you for watching, thanks for listening, and thank you to my amazing patrons. You guys are absolutely incredible, and I cannot wait to see you all in the next one.